Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, and I am so glad to be back into the office and back with you live for this show. I've been on the road producing events for the last 3 weeks, and it's a little bit of brain fog here, but I'm so excited to bring you my friend, good friend here, Aurora Dawn Benton from Oh my God, I said it before here. Strapto.
I thought it's perfect.
Strapto. Okay, I know how to say that. She is the founder and chief change agent at Strapto, and that word means to illuminate. And to go along with that, her mission is to shed light on social and environmental issues in the hospitality, travel, and events. And we've been working together 5 years. Yeah. On really focusing on sustainability in the hospitality and events industry. So hello, my friend.
Hello. Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome. And I'm so glad I got you on the tail end or when you just got home too from a road trip.
I know, exactly. It's amazing how this aligned, right?
It did. And your cute little dogs. Check her out on Instagram because her dogs are adorable. Okay, so the topic for today, and I'm going to make is understanding prolifically problematic food to reduce waste and save money. And I have to tell you that the word prolifically problematic have been in my head and will not stop repeating themselves. I'm like, I've got to put music on because I keep saying these words over and over in my head. And as I told you in an email, it sounds like something Mary Poppins would say, which is my favorite character besides Winnie the Pooh. So anyways, I know you've been on the road. You've been doing a lot of work with World Wildlife Fund up in the Pacific Northwest, and you just did a food audit and released a case study on that and problematic event waste. So I really want to delve in and talk to the Eating at a Meeting listeners about what that means. So what does prolifically problematic mean?
Well, first of all, I love the word problematic, right? Like it means this tends to be a problem. Whenever you're going to see this, there's probably going to be a problem. So it's almost like the word prolific. Isn't needed, but it's like an exclamation point for like prolifically problematic. Like these are the things that always cause problems, and they're just everywhere. It's everywhere all the time, right? So it started out with, we know that's going to be problematic. We know that's going to be problematic. We know this is pretty prolific, isn't it? Oh, it's prolifically problematic, right? And then unfortunately, I could never come up with the third P to describe like the products, the food, the items, the setups, whatever. So this prolifically problematic, yes, there. all of
it. After you say it a couple times, it does just ring off the top of your tongue. And having just produced 3 events, right? And 2 of which I was managing the food and beverage, but there are prolifically problematic problems with food and beverage. My angle does include the sustainability aspect, but just creating that inclusive experience. And so what are so what is it? Food? Is it food in general? Is it how we plan events? Is it what is it?
In this case, what we did is we were starting with specific foods, the specific menu items, because you could also probably say the same thing about specific setups, and we have done some of that work as well. But it started with what are the things we serve at events that pretty much always go to waste. And those things are breakfast breads, pastries, bagels. So pretty much all the breakfast breads, pastries, bagels, desserts, tarts, cookies, brownies, all the desserts, fruit, cut fruit or whole fruit, condiments, sauces, dressings, all of that category of things. salad toppings, really any kind of build your own. That also includes like oatmeal toppings as well. Cheese and charcuterie boards, while they're not as prolific an item that is served, when they are served, they do tend to be problematic. Also, crudités often is as well. And then coffee and creamer, surprisingly, you see, and little things like lemons and limes as part of fruit, but just like the fact that they're a lot of times pre-cut and put on tables, buffet service or a preset. And so those are the things that we have deemed the prolifically problematic items.
Well, and that just brings me back to the lunch we had together. We were in Savannah, and we went to that offsite lunch, and we both stood up at the end of lunch and took a picture from the top down of the food table. Mm-hmm. And the thing that was left was desserts, and I remember lemons and what it was all preset. All of that stuff was presets. And then there was a whole...
and the iced tea.
And actually, I'm going to tell you something I did at the event 2-3 weeks ago is I actually set up water and tea stations on the 4 stations around the room. I had 700 people coming in for lunch, and the catering team was like, this is not going to work. It's going to be a bottleneck. But thankfully, everybody came in kind of not in a mad rush. They got their tea, they went to their tables, and it worked beautifully. And I did it for 4.
And how many, can I ask you, what percentage of people would you say serve themselves tea?
Probably 5-10%.
Exactly.
And I actually didn't even go check to see where the containers were. So that will be my next step is in doing that. But I'm like, and we were in the desert. I told the hotel, I'm like, we are in the desert. I do not want to preset water and iced tea. It's pointless because I want to preserve it because we're in the desert even more. So.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so talk through this case study. What are some key things that you found? I mean, those are a lot of things that are served. Those foods that you mentioned are a lot of things that we serve every single day and are standard banquet items.
Exactly. And that's why they're prolifically problematic. They tend to be popular.
I don't know if they're popular.
They're popular at one time. Let's put it this way. Some of them may or may not still be popular, but at one time they were popular. They tend to be popular. They tend to be cheap, right? And they tend to be, and of course we start talking about sort of the service pieces. They tend to be things that you can easily put out multiple of. You can put lots of it out, again, so that the banquet staff isn't having to run back and get more, even though we know they're rarely going to need more, right? And of course, it depends on the event, right? There's always... And this is the thing. Okay, let me just stop and just say this. This is the other thing that I'm really trying to address in all of this. Everywhere I go, it starts with the conversation, oh, we don't really have waste. You get past that part. I show them what it means to actually have food waste. Because a lot of times they think because they're composting, that's it. They're done. They check my box. So once we kind of break down that myth, then it's all these sort of like, oh, well, here's an example of this. Here's a photo of what I saw here. And I start showing all these examples. And inevitably, someone in the room, usually the executive chef, or someone, maybe a banquet director, will say, oh, well, we don't do that here. Or my people know better than that. Is often presets, right? Oh, we don't preset teas here. What's that in the ballroom right there? Oh, the planner asked for it. So all the time, it never fails that when I'm on property and I hear them say, we don't do whatever, it never fails that I see it that day while I'm on property. And every time there's a reason for it, an excuse, right? And it's usually because the planner asked for it. Well, the problem is that there are so many exceptions to the rule that the exception is the rule, that there really are no rules. When you go in and you talk about events, and staff say like, well, we always do this thing or we never do that thing. I mean, you've got a few convention centers, especially, and maybe some hotels where they have drawn a hard line around what they will and will not do. And so that's great. I admire a really firm policy about like not doing presets or not using styrofoam or something like that. But a lot of times, the vast majority of the time, if the planner asked for it, or if it is perceived that the planner asked for it, even though the planner never actually asked for it, the caterer will do it. And so there is an automatic, the first thing we need to do is sort of break down a bit of the psychological barrier. And then once you do that, and once you start saying the prolifically problematic items, it's like everybody goes like, oh, everybody's just laughing because it's so obvious. It's just crazy obvious, right? So the reason I really started down this path of prolifically problematic items was I started seeing, I think it was a few things. One is once I could start to get certain staff sharing what they see, I realized, like, if I were to create this exercise where staff can list on a whiteboard or flip chart what they see as problematic, it makes other people in the room stop ignoring it and brushing it off. So I would do the cross-functional, or I would say, hey, I want everyone in the marketing department to write your list. I want everyone in stewarding to write your list. And it was amazing to compare the list and see what people observe, because you can't then say, well, you're wrong. Oh, really? I mean, they see it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started thinking, okay, well, we do these food waste audits that are in theory supposed to measure and weigh every single thing from end to end. And very few places do those because it's a little bit impossible to do that with the space, the equipment, the resources, the staff, all of that. And so I started thinking, like, what if we just audited these things? What if the things that are on this list, what if we just fix those things first? It's the 80-20 rule. What if we just fix these things? Because if we just fix these things, we would fix the culture. We would fix the mentality, and the rest will take care of itself. Because you will create a process, right? You'll create an awareness by just working on the things that staff see and want to deal with the most. When they start to see that happen, they're going to believe that the change is real and that you really mean it. And that is, like, I'll tell you, one of the directors we worked with in our project last year at one of the convention centers, at the end when we did a focus group, he said something that is just magic to me. He said, because of the way we did this and we got all of our staff involved, normally when we introduce new things, it's all about, like, oh, you just want to save money. It's all about cost savings. But he said that because of the way they went about this, he said he saw commitment rather than compliance.
Interesting. That's great. Yeah.
Who wouldn't want that from your dishwasher to your GM? Who wouldn't want to see commitment rather than compliance, right?
Right.
So anyway, back to your original question about this case study. So along these lines of, like, let's start with just focusing on audits of the things that are most problematic. We were fortunate enough to get GreenBiz. If you're not familiar with GreenBiz, they're a fantastic media company, and they hold many events throughout the year on different sustainability topics. They were holding a meeting at the Hyatt Regency Seattle, a conference of about 1,200 to 1,500 people called Circularity. For those of you who are not familiar with the term circularity, it's really all about designing in less materials, more recycling, reuse, repurposing of materials. So what better place to focus on food waste? So I did a complete training with the planning team for GreenBiz as well as the operational team at the Hyatt. And what we did is we did an on-site audit of prolifically problematic items. And I will say that what was interesting is the items that we focused on for breakfast, one day we did pastries, the other day we did fruit, very little waste in those. And of course, I'm just there for this one event. I'm not there all the time. And so that begs the question of, like, well, was it just because there was a spotlight on it? Are you going to continue doing this? So there's more work to be done. But on the, I see sometimes the little thing blocked.
Yeah, you're good.
Internet thing. I have not the greatest internet. So on the planner side, they were very cautious and conservative about managing their numbers. On the supplier side, on the hotel side, they were also very cautious about following what those numbers were and not doing overages. And they actually ran out of these items. They ran out of pastries, had to fire some more, but they really ran out. Now, the good news is they focused on a prolifically problematic item. They understand how to do the audit. They understand how doable that is. It was safe. Nobody freaked out because they ran out of croissants and muffins. On the other hand, though, the waste of other items on the morning buffet was quite high. It's kind of what you would expect, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of normal, right? I say quite high. I mean, really kind of normal, right? And so it's like, okay, but I even had to preach to myself, like, just take it one step at a time. Remember, it's okay. It's not great that these other things were wasted, but that's okay. We'll get to these things. But I will give them credit for this one thing. They noticed the first day of breakfast, one of the sous chefs at the Hyatt looked at the pot that the syrup was normally served in, and he said, we should make that smaller, right? Again, we're paying attention to waste. And he thought of that and caught that. So they reduced the size of the bowls. And that resulted in a prevention of 60%, more than 60% prevention of food waste just by going to a smaller vessel. And again, nothing went wrong. All fine, right? So yes, there were some other things that were wasteful, but look at these key items where we have such an amazing story to tell. Mm-hmm. And I would add, if you're trying to make the business case for this, yes, that's only syrup, but we did some projections and figured out that, you know what, given how many breakfast buffets they do, it could probably save $6,000 to $10,000 a year at least. Right. But that could at least say that, right? So it's kind of fun to have just these one little snippets of data and you're going to extrapolate.
Well, I mean, and I'm just going back to my buffet from 3 weeks ago. And I mean, I'm looking at, we had 700 people, 500 to 700 people for breakfast. I'm like, and I know we did the 4 buffets and we broke them down, had them go. But I'm thinking, besides the pastries, there's the bacon. There's the sausage.
You got the scrambled eggs list. Yeah. Actually, that you brought that up because that almost always makes the list of top 10. I didn't name it earlier, but that's often on the list.
Because it's like, do you really need that many pieces of sausage? And actually, do you need bacon and sausage? Right. And, but then Aurora, it comes down to as well and a planner, I'm going to ask this question in a second, but it also comes down to, this is what is standard on the banquet menu, right? And if you want, and I'm not going to say the property, but I'm like, on the continental breakfast, you have to add eggs. There's nothing but pastries and fruit, right? If I want to add eggs, it's like $8 a person. Mm-hmm. And then, but if I want to go ahead and get eggs, bacon, and sausage, I only have to pay $12 a person more. So I did that, but then to change out the eggs, it cost me another $8 a person, right? So, I mean, but these are the standard banquet menus that every single hotel around the world serves.
Yeah.
Right. And we need to get out of that mentality.
Yes. This to me is the next frontier, right? Yeah. So the prolifically problematic items, another thing that went very hand in hand with this through our work over the last year is almost universally, especially in hotels, which tend to do a lot of smaller meetings, but even in convention centers, this was found to be true. One of the quickest wins and quickest ways to reduce food waste was buying new vessels. The standard square salad dressing bowl that everyone's been using for a number of years is ridiculously big. Even for larger buffets, depending on how many lines you have, how quickly you're going to break them down, things like that, it's just too much. And it's not published in the case study, but we do have data on how much salad dressing was wasted for the meal that we audited. We actually measured and we have photos and stuff of that. And so vessels, and what I loved is at every single property that we worked at, it was a quick win where they're like, oh, well, we can source new vessels. Oh, we've got a vessel, we can put that in. And just like that was the syrup thing, right? This is the normal vessel. Why don't we go to this vessel? Done, right? Now, then you're going to have some pushback sometimes like, well, if we've got a very large event, we don't have that much. Well, I would argue that you could justify it. You can justify the expenditure. And a lot of places, because we were coming out of COVID, a lot of them were like, well, we have the capital budget to invest in some new equipment, some new vessels, new things that will help us in the reduction. And so I think those are two very quick wins, is sort of the prolifically problematic items and the vessels. I do believe that a next level, sort of a next frontier, is to re-engineer how we do menus, because you're right. And I always ask the question, how many of your functions are custom menus? And it's always more than 50%.
It is.
And here's the problem. Mm-hmm. An untested menu is a wasteful menu. If you haven't done these configurations before, you're sort of stringing all that, you're kind of piecing all these pieces together because you're trying to meet a planner's budget. You're like, then you don't necessarily haven't sat down and thought, well, if we put this together and this together and this together, we should decrease the portions of that. We should probably only do one station of this. instead, you're sort of piecing together the way you might normally serve that continental breakfast, the way you might normally serve this, and then you're putting all of it together, and it's like 1 + 1 = 86. I mean, it's like, doing that, it ends up just being sort of ridiculously wasteful. And so I do think that there is an opportunity, especially like at the corporate level. I think it's really challenging for the corporate levels of the hotels and the convention center caterers to come up with things that can be easily implemented, because a lot of times it's very hard to scale culture change. I ran into this a lot. Like, oh, it's great if I can buy a bunch of cool scale technology for the kitchen. It's like, yes, but we still hear that only like 20% are using it. So we still need to do the culture change. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that helping the properties with some menu design and menu formulation is probably something they could develop at a corporate level and roll out. And I'm sure probably some of them are already working on that. But I think that would be a great thing for us to start seeing.
Yeah, I mean, because it really, and this is one of the questions that I wrote an article for meetings, successful meetings and North Star, and it was about food waste. And somebody wrote me a note in LinkedIn separately saying, one of her challenges is kind of what you just said. I want to order salad for my meal, but I don't want to order it for all 500 people because I know only 30% of my people will eat. But the hotels require us to order it for 500 people. Yeah. And I just had that problem with my omelet station. I didn't want omelets for 430 people. I only wanted omelets for 200 people. Mm-hmm. Allow me to do that. And I know that I didn't have 430 people get omelets. So that is another cultural shift that we have to think about with our menus, because I had to order food. And so you're talking about the prolifically problematic foods. All of those things that were diced and chopped up to put on omelets for 430 people. 200 people didn't eat omelets.
Yeah, exactly. No, 100%.
Yeah.
And also just the food. And here, listen, a lot of my clients are mostly suppliers. So I'm very sympathetic to the fact that if we start talking about food and beverage minimums, we are stepping into a very tricky territory, but we're going to have to get there. Because even like the net zero carbon events or I forget the exact wording, you probably know what I'm talking about. Right. On their list, on their roadmap, one of the items is to eliminate food and beverage minimums. They've identified as like a top key thing to do is to eliminate food and beverage minimums. That's a big ask. That's a challenging thing. The caterers and the hotels are going to need to understand how they're going to be able to protect their business with that. But one of the things we talked about last year, the work we did at some of the sites that we worked with are on their journey to doing this, is can you do other things with the food and beverage minimum besides serve food and beverage, right? Because that's one of the reasons why meal breaks get added in. Oh, we've got to spend this X $1,000 more. Well, let's just add an afternoon break. Let's add another appetizer at the reception. Right? Like that's how food gets thrown into all of these things. If you've got more money you have to spend. But what if you replaced a morning break with a CSR activity? And instead of charging the planner to serve food, you're charging the planner to organize, host, set up. Now, if you're a hotel, of course, you own the total package. If you're a convention center caterer, that's a little tricky because you only sell food. And so there has to be some give and take in how that's approached. But I think we have to start getting more creative about how a hotel can fairly and legitimately earn the revenue that they deserve for offering such a great experience and service, other than just tacking on more food to meet some kind of minimum.
Right. Well, and that's a humongous and enlightening thought process around that, because we're so opposed to charging a room rental, right? Oh no, I don't want a room rental. I want the food and beverage minimum. But then again, and let's just think about how much food and beverage is wasted. It's typically 40% is wasted in the United States, and that's from farm to table, right? But if that's 40% of your budget on food is already getting wasted, what could you do with that $40,000, right? Yeah. If your budget is $100,000, like that's a lot.
And some of the properties we worked with are starting to shift more to a model. Yeah.
And planners have to be okay. Like, hey, you want to use this hotel, you're renting their meeting space. That's literally what you're doing. Yeah. You're not renting food and beverage, you're renting meeting space.
Most of the sales and services teams have told me that as long as they have a compelling why to tell the planners, generally speaking, the planners on board with whatever these kinds of options are, But this is another one of my like my pushes and the thing I'm trying to really work on in this industry is, yes, that's true, but that doesn't mean that sales and services teams are automatically confident and comfortable in just having that conversation. Mm-hmm. There needs to be a lot more invested in the training and the engagement of sales and service and client-facing people so that they feel courageous enough to say, we're going to charge you this, and here's why, right? Like a lot of people, if they're given the option to not have that conversation, they will just not have that conversation because it could be contentious, it could be rejecting, it can be scary. And so another quote we heard from the focus groups last year was that the sales and services teams were talking about how they went from just answering questions when the planner brought it up to proactively bringing these things up and educating their planners. What a transformation that is. Right. And we need a lot more of that, because if the sales and services teams are able to be more consultative, then that's going to drive a lot of the like planning level change that will then hopefully have like a positive domino effect going forward.
Well, and that just reminds me of a caterer that I talked to months ago, and what her biggest challenge is right now, and this was probably last year at some point, is that a lot of people that are calling them to order are new to the industry and new to this whole process of ordering food and beverage or renting their spaces and things like that. So they're having, and these sales teams, some of them don't have the time to educate. So it does have to be fit in there to do that, because as we get more and more people coming into the industry, as we need and we want, we need to make sure that we have that education.
And that's actually some of the next level work we're trying to accomplish with Rural Wildlife Fund. We're actually in the process of trying to raise funds to do a new scope of work, which would actually be a larger scale, comprehensive, quantitative study of planners so that we can ask these more nuanced questions. Because then if we can go to the suppliers and say, 86% of planners said that they would be somewhat or very likely to blah, 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 if you did blah, blah, blah. And I think that's going to really help. And a lot of those studies have traditionally been higher level so far with sustainability. It's time for us to start getting more and more granular with those questions we're asking, because then those can be translated into action. And then a phase after that would be for us to develop some industry-wide education. And maybe it would be because that's what we're hearing a lot of, like, do you have a quick video I can share with my planner? Mm-hmm. Well, no. And maybe does it need to be Hyatt or Hilton or Marriott specific? I don't know. Like, these are the things we need to learn and understand from the industry. What kind of role can an organization like World Wildlife Fund or the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment or other organizations out there that are addressing this topic, what role can they play in providing some of those industry resources that they're best positioned to provide for, especially for those that may not have the resources, independent planners or planners that are one of 8,000 jobs I have.
Exactly. I mean, it is, I don't know. I mean, which brings me to an idea. I think I sent you this question in advance. A planner reached out to me the other day, and this person is new to the organization that she's working with. And the woman's like, okay, we've got 2,500 people, so we're going to order 2,500 bagels. I'm like, no, you're not. And I love your story from the convention, if you're allowed to talk about it, from New Orleans. But I mean, I don't eat bagels. Go ahead and count the people who are celiac off your list or gluten-free that are not going to eat bagels, or that are vegan, whatever.
Oh, wow. The bagels are always. So here's the thing with the bagels. We did a food waste audit in fall of 2019 at the New Orleans Convention Center for like a 5,000 person event over multiple days. And they order from a local baker in town. And so they all their bagels and all their pastries and everything. So on day one, we were doing these full scale audits. I mean, weighing and counting and donating and everything. So on day one, the executive chef, he looked at the results and he called the baker and he was like, cut it by 30% on day 2. And he cut it day 3. And at the end of the event, they took bagels off the menu. Because it was, this is one of the things I say all the time. I'm like, if you had like these items on your list, if there's any of it that you can take off, why are you serving these things? Why are you offering the things that you know are always going to be wasteful, right? I mean, there's only so far you can take that, right? You can't take pastries completely off the menu. But they took bagels off the menu and made it an enhancement, right? So if a planner wants it, they will pay separate for it, which means the planner has to be more intentional about how many exactly they want to order. Not only does that, I joked and I said to the executive chef when I talked to him about just in the last few months, I said, I often tell people that you probably paid for all of the training and everything that I offered in bagel savings alone. He said, no doubt. Yes, right? And so also condiments, all the condiments and toasters, bagels just are problematic in a lot of ways. And I've done a little informal survey in a lot of places where I go to speak on this, and I'll say, how many people in the room like bagels or will eat a bagel? And a certain number of people raise their hand. I'll say, how many of you will only eat a bagel if it's toasted? And the majority of people will say that. So if you don't have a toaster, if you're serving bagels, and then the size of the bagel, these bagels at New Orleans Convention Center are like this big. So everybody, fortunately, this is a big trend right now. Everybody's moving to like the mini portions, which is good to see. But then when I was speaking with the convention center in recent months, because I did a little auditing work there, and they were he was telling me like, yep, I recently had a planner ask for X thousand bagels, and he said nope. And he ordered, I think it was like a third of what that planner requested, and they still had leftovers. So this really gets at one of the big problems that we have, and that is the trust relationship between a supplier and planner. And we know that is sometimes contentious at best, and there's not a lot. And a lot of times, like, the supplier has a mentality of like, I know what I'm doing. You don't come in here and tell me how many of this to serve and how many of that to serve. Or the planner will ask for something that would reduce waste, and the suppliers simply refuse. I hear this a lot.
Yes.
I asked my supplier to do that, and they refuse. And therefore, we have to start building this stuff into contracts. It needs to start being built into the RFP. If you're not saying it in the RFP and you're not saying it in those early stages, then you can't expect 10 steps into the process to suddenly say that this is something you require or want and to get their attention. There has to be a price to pay, unfortunately. I mean, there's carrot and stick. I'm trying to use a lot of carrot in this, but sometimes a little stick goes a long way. And so I think that if there's because I will say, like, one thing I hear sometimes is like, okay, we come in and we do this great thing, and there's this, look, we didn't waste this item. And then someone will say like, yeah, but this isn't normal. If we had done this on any other event, we'd be giving refunds. It's like, well, but that's the mentality, and so you're never, ever going to try to do this well again, because you're always going to be afraid that a refund's going to be required. So again,
refund for what? Sorry,
we're running out of food. We're running out of items, so we're going to have to give a refund. They're upset about that.
Which is what I hope I just said that right. Papa just said, planners have to get comfortable with running out of certain food items. And and just to add on to that, I'm like, you don't need food until the very last minute of your event, right? I mean, of your food function.
Yeah.
You don't have to be restocking it fully.
When you're replacing items and you're doing things at like 10 minutes before the service ends, and like, do you really need a heaping, overflowing platter of these things, right? The aesthetics. A lot of the food service on both sides is really for aesthetic purposes. And I think, again, I bet we could solve that with digital displays and different sorts of buffet setups and different sorts of consolidation and marrying of lines and things like that, if we just were a little bit better at that. And I get it. I'm sure that all the people out there on both sides of this probably, I know anytime I'm speaking, I think a lot of times people are like, must be nice to live in the la la land where everything, all these things are doable, but I am not naive to the realities of what everyone's doing.
Yeah.
So I'm throwing out a lot of these ideas, but even if you just latched onto one of them and really tried it and built confidence and built trust and built experience and have a case study, then the next time you'll try more.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. All right. So do you have any photos or anything?
I do. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to
share my screen. I'm going to show you a few things from some audits that I've done and some photos. A critical aspect of what I'm about to show you is the photo. So I'm really happy that I have an opportunity to present. So one of the things, again, that I've seen in food waste audits is all this need to like weigh and separate. And it's very technical. And what I find a lot of times is that you can take a picture of something and it doesn't even matter if you know how much it weighed or didn't. Just seeing the photo is enough to go, what? That, right? So this is an example from the work we did with World Wildlife Fund last year and an organization called Cascadia Consulting that's out of the Pacific Northwest. They were doing the technical audit here at one of the properties we were working with. And they did a full waste audit of everything. But what I'm going to show you is 3 results that all have dairy in them, because the dairy industry is a pretty significant contributor to greenhouse gases. And cheese, like for example, cheese is one of the items that's higher on the list of water it takes to create the item. So it's very important to think about our consumption. And these, again, sort of prolifically problematic items. Butter is a condiment, which is on the list. So there was about 3 pounds of butter left over. This is, we had the weight, but then you can actually see in all these jars, this particular property immediately changed how they did butter at plated events right after this. So that's a great win. Mm-hmm. Then creamer, right? Okay, so this is the table setting. Again, this is a luncheon. That's the creamer. Okay, 140 ounces of cream was wasted. I mean,
wow.
But what does that even mean? I mean, how much is 140 ounces? If you're just in a meeting with a bunch of people that work in a hotel and you tell them 140 ounces of cream was, I mean, some people might be like, okay, this is how much cream was wasted. So when you see it and you see it like this, all of a sudden it's like, I don't need to know what 140 ounces is. I just know that's a lot. And if you put those 2 pictures together, what's the solution to this problem?
Creamer on request,
or 1 creamer per table. Do you really need 2 creamers per table?
Yeah.
Right? So again, just using the photos makes it super
happy with that.
Now, cheesecake, if you know that you started with 91 pounds and you ended with 43 pounds, well, then you kind of know, like you can kind of do some quick math. And so, yes, that does tell you something. But when you see the photo, it is really telling, right? It's like, okay, it looks like people at least took a few bites, but we could easily have created a little cheesecake bite. Would have been plenty. You could have put 5 of them on a plate for a table for 7, probably would have been safe, right? Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, like a little share plate, right? Now, you know, what I hear sometimes, because we've worked with some luxury properties, is they say something like, well, how am I supposed to make that dessert look like it's worth $53? I'm like, the pastry team, your pastry team can figure out ways. I mean, there's gold leaf, there's logos, there's, you know, specialty ingredients. Believe me, you can find a way to make a cheesecake bite worth $53, but don't do it through size. So here's the lesson. I don't have this on the slide, but here's what I want you to type in for everybody to remember. This is the mantra. Volume does not equal value. Volume does not equal value. Get away from thinking that everything has to be big and plentiful to be valuable, right? Volume does not equal value.
Just think about a Michelin star restaurant, right?
Exactly.
Volume does not equal value, right?
Exactly. That's right. So we introduced a tool throughout this process that we worked with the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment. This is from the Vancouver Convention Center. They did a great job with this project. I mean, they just really embraced it and excelled at this. And they did 2 buffets. So that's the first buffet. And then the second buffet is this one. Audits. One was for buffet, one was for plated. And at the end, what they determined based on their full audit was, we're going to take bread off of the buffet standard menu. It is now going to be an enhancement. So if it's needed, it can be ordered, but it's really not needed. And we're going to keep it on the plated, but we're going to reduce our piece per person. Because if you think about even the logistics and mechanics of eating, if I go to a buffet, I pick up a bunch of stuff, I put it all on my plate, I put the bread on my plate, but when I sit down and start to eat, the bread's really not my priorities. Take it, right? Especially if it's at the end of the buffet line. Whereas a plated dinner, when I sit down, a lot of times bread's the only thing to start eating, and I'm hungry. So we start eating, you're just going to eat it. So you're just even thinking about the logistics and the flow of how people eat. The one thing I do want to remind everyone is that taking these photos can be very enlightening, and it can be a little bit like, holy crap, what are we doing? And look at how bad that is. But I really try to remind everyone, both the planners and suppliers and the suppliers with their teams internally, this is not a gotcha. Do not treat this like a way to take a photo and come back to your supplier or come back to your staff and chew them out for this. Because guess what? Everyone's been doing this for a long time and we're all to blame. Every bit of us, every part of the supply, the whole event ecosystem has contributed to the problem for a very long time. So we can't expect that suddenly everyone's going to get it and make the change. Use the photos in a way, and sometimes I use them to almost kind of poke fun, especially like if it's the photo and I'm showing internally to my client. We can be a little bit jokey about it, but it's to make the point. And at the end of the day, I'm trying to make sure everybody has a more positive approach to this and sees it as an opportunity to solve a problem and not feel guilty or anything like that. I would encourage you to keep taking those photos, but be careful about the blame and shame game with them. Make it more an opportunity to say, I'd love to do my event here again next year, but I just want to share some photos with you and just talk about what we can do. Because let me tell you something, all of that pushback you get from your suppliers where they don't necessarily want to do what you've asked, the photo is the way to break a lot of that down. Because even within the hotel staff, you might have one department or one person would say, well, I noticed this. And the executive chef shoot them down. That's not a problem. We don't have a problem with that. And so I still start taking photos of it. Sure enough, taking photos of it. When we go into the meeting and the chef sees that, and you can visibly see the look on his face. Oh, okay, this is a problem, right? And then once that barrier is broken down, everyone gets into problem-solving mode. Like we don't need to point fingers here. We don't need to be upset. We just need to see that this is a problem. Find a way to make sure you see it's a problem. And then let's work together collaboratively to fix the problem.
Right, exactly. I mean, because it's, and even when I approach this whole thing around dietary restrictions and whatever, I'm like, I actually did a presentation recently to a property and I'm like, have you ever looked at your menus this way? And I take the menu and I just reading the menu as is, filter it for dietary restrictions. I'm like, you have 30 appetizers. Not a single one of them is gluten-free.
Wow.
They're like, what?
Right.
And I'm like, not a single one of them is dairy free. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, and the gluten, well, and actually that was a lie. They had one. The gluten-free, dairy-free item contained pork. I'm like,
wow. Yeah.
They're like, wow, we've never looked at it. So it's just looking at it from a different perspective and not pointing fingers at people and saying, hey, but opening it up as an opportunity. I'm like, hey, because I had a really hard time choosing hors d'oeuvres. Because I know what my needs are. It got planner that asked me. I know that only 30% of our attendees eat salad. So we don't need to order it for all 100%.
Right.
And it's really kind of eye-opening on that. And there was something else that came to my mind, but now it's gone. So Chris is back here and saying, or Chaz, how planners get buy-in from their managers, executives on these issues. Do you have, or most of your clients are suppliers. So do you have suggestions on planners?
Yeah. So I'm starting to work more with the planner side, which is so exciting because, and even better, the best possible scenario was when I got to work with both the planner and the supplier for the same event. How powerful that was, because I could always sort of broker some of the conversations and I could say to the planner, like, you should ask for this. And I could say to the supplier, like, you should change the menu to be that, right? Like it was a little bit easier to kind of see both the needs of both sides. So I think the managers and executives, I mean, I think it like selling any idea, it really is going to come down to what is driving their choices, right? Like it's all about budget. And maybe you're able to tie food waste into like discounts or something with the supplier, because if it reduces their food costs, I mean, a lot of people in this space, they want to say like, well, let's get planners engaged because it'll reduce budgets. And I'm like, yeah, but it may not always reduce budgets because the menu is what it is. But if you, like your example was perfect, Tracy, if you could say, I want this menu, this full menu for 80% of my audience, but I want this menu for only 20% of my audience or something like that, right? So part of it could be budget. I think part of it could be also just the overall experience, because one of the things, especially I think when you have smaller meetings, well, if we're going to reduce our food waste and eliminate, like if we're going to do smaller desserts, what if or a smaller portion of meat, what if we upgraded the ingredients? What if we saved money here and added bar service? Everybody loves that, right? What if we reduced the portions or the stuff here, but we added a fancy dessert that we weren't going to do or something, right? Like I think so. Then you're really talking experience. You're really talking about takeaways, the memorable aspects of the event. So if the culinary team is willing to work with you on sort of trading out, and again, if you're looking to walk in and order off the menu and have a very transactional event, then a lot of this isn't for you, because a lot of this does take conversation and negotiation
and time.
Everybody is happy. It wants to do that, right? But it takes conversation and negotiation. So I think it's about finding out what matters most. If diversity and inclusion is really important to the decision makers, then that, again, is going to be another factor, because one of the things that has been noted as being very problematic is any sort of build your own. So on the one side, you've got build your own as wasteful. On the other side, you've got build your own as inclusive. These do not always work perfectly together. So there's going to be compromise, right? So, because if you have all the ingredients separately, inevitably, that's wasteful. If you put all the ingredients on the salad or on the whatever, then inevitably you've got people who can't eat it or don't want to eat it. And so, again, there's no one size fits all for this stuff, right? So it's about a negotiation. And so if your managers and executives can help you prioritize, because see, that's another thing as a planner, you're like, okay, great. Now I got to micromanage every single menu item.
That's where I come in.
Right. That's a lot. And that's exactly, you can have people like us. Tracy and I can help planners with that.
Right.
Not everyone has the budget to bring in a third party to help with that. So then for those, it's like, well, then which of this list of things do I need to care about? Well, you should be getting that direction. Let those managers and executives tell you, because then when they can't get everything on their list, you should have it like documented of like, we all decided that these are the top 3 priorities as it relates to sustainability. So these were the things I prioritized. These are the things we put in the contract. These are the things that we audited. And you can only do so much of that at once.
Right. Okay. So 2 things came to mind, and I remembered that one story. So I was on site after my second event of 3. And I said, one of the things that I did is I actually ordered my desserts and made them my lunch desserts for my afternoon break. Mm-hmm. And even though I had 700 people for lunch, I only ordered 300 desserts. Mm. And one of my friends from a hotel is like, the hotels are never going to let you do that. That's just horrible. They're not. I'm like, but I don't understand what the problem is. I'm like, I know that in my afternoon break, that 700 people are not going to eat. And it was a smaller portion, which is great. Mm-hmm. They weren't getting a full piece of cheesecake, but it saved me money because it was wrapped into the overall cost of my lunch.
Right.
The hotel did not charge me a replate fee for doing that, which last year they did. So this year they did not, which is great. But I didn't have to waste the food on the people that were not going to eat it. Mm-hmm. And that's huge. But I'm like, that was a hotelier saying that, hey, you can't, hotels are not going to like you for that. I'm like, but they are, because one, they're reducing their cost, right? Because they're not having to make 700 desserts, and they're saving time out of their employees, right? They're not doing that. So thinking through it in those ways, I'm like, you're still making the $55 per person per lunch, but your cost just came down because I'm cutting my desserts in half.
Right. Exactly.
And so you're still making the revenue.
Like you say, all the labor for dishwashers to scrape those plates, all of the hauling fees, because you're likely paying for your composter to pick this up, and it all adds up. Those are heavy items too, right? So it all really adds up.
So my next question is, so if there's a planner out there who wants to be sustainable, but their company is not, how do we incorporate these things into the planning process that helps our client look good, even if that's not what they're focused on? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Because there's a lot of ways to incorporate sustainability, even if you're talking about sourcing, if you're talking about food waste. And that is always a question, right? Because some people, like GreenBiz, they actually had in their app a description of everything. They actually asked people to post pictures of their food waste. They actually explain, here's what we're doing, photos. They were, yes, exactly. They advertised it. And of course, This is very unusual. The vast majority of planners are not going to do this. They're not going to make it very obvious. And we would not have been able to get away with taking all the photos we took front of house, right? And so there are ways to, I think, make that more subtle. And so I think maybe starting with the pieces that are not so visible, right? So what are some back of house changes that can be made? What are some changes, again, like safe changes? And even if you're talking increments, right? So you went from 700 desserts to 300. That does sound scary, but maybe it's 700 to 500. And maybe you prove no one freaked out. And then the next time it's 700 to 400, right? Like you build confidence. And most of all, start with those under the radar changes, build your own confidence in it, and document everything. Document it all so that later when there's any pushback, you can say, well, these are the 8 things we've already done. Did you not notice this?
Right.
You have photos, you have metrics, you have quotes or whatever that you can. And I'd say always try to align it with whatever the strategic objectives are of the meeting. So I do this activity when I do food waste training, and I say, on the planner side, what's the strategic objective of your meeting? And what is it about the demographics of your audience that you're trying to like really amplify and leverage, right? Do you want them to network a lot? Are they like super healthy eaters? Like, what do you know? What's your strategic objective to your meeting? Because food should not just be there to give calories. Food should be there to support the strategic objective of the meeting. And there are ways to use food and beverage to do that. And so if you're presenting it in that way and you happen to reduce waste or source better or do other sustainable things in that vein, you're really selling it as like making food and beverage strategic. That's the big picture. All the other stuff that falls under it is great, but the big picture is you're trying to make that food and beverage experience a more strategic part of the meeting.
Well, and I love because I say that all the time in every one of my presentations and speeches I do. It has to be that because it is the number one expenditure that you have, and it's the thing that you focus the least amount of time on,
right?
And so I'm like, that's counterintuitive. You focus so much on, are we going to have an app or are we going to print our programs? Are we going to, what kind of speaker? We're going to pay $75,000 to have XYZ come and speak to our group. Did they get that much out of that, right? But you waste 40% of your food, your number one expense, by not looking at it strategically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So,
and it's like anything that you start to put a microscope on a little bit, when you start to really analyze things differently, the sustainability is just going to, right? It's like all of this stuff is going to rear its head. You're going to see, it's going to become obvious. And that's one of the reasons why I say that, like, seeing is believing, because a lot of times we're just on autopilot. We're just copy paste autopilot. We're not, it's muscle memory. We're not paying attention. Right. As soon as you just sort of get like woken up to like this thing, right? Like as soon as you see it, you're like, oh, then all of a sudden it's a different conversation, and people feel more compelled to fix it because they see it. Right. Like I often say, like, waste has become white noise in events. Mm-hmm. We just don't even notice it or pay attention to it. But once, even people who've been doing this for a very long time, once they suddenly see like, oh, this isn't okay, I can actually do something about this. I mean, we're talking a banquet server, a stewarding director, whatever, like the people who've been seeing this stuff for a long time, they often have this epiphany of like, this has literally been right under our noses, and we just haven't done anything about it. Now that we see it, we want to solve it. And that's one of the reasons why I don't focus on telling people what kind of vessels to buy, what to do with their menus, or any of that. Because what I say to them is, you already know all that. Do your business, I do your brand standards, all that. All I'm trying to do is get you to see that there's a problem. And once I can get you to see that there's a problem, you're probably going to figure it out. I mean, I got some ideas for you, but you probably already know instantly how to solve that problem because this is your business and you know what you're doing. But it's just making them see the obvious problem with what they're doing.
Yeah. I just quoted you on that. Waste has become the white noise of events because It is really engaging those servers, because those servers are your front of house people, right? And they're your front, they see it. The chefs are in the kitchen, right? And I'm not bashing them for that, right? But the servers are your front facing ambassadors for your company. Yep. They're the ones that see things that you don't see every single day. They know how much they're putting into the trash can, right? They are scraping away, or what people like to eat and don't like to eat. And they love their jobs, because majority of them have been there for 26 years.
For a long time.
Yes. Yeah. They love their job.
I'm so glad you said that, because honestly, one of the reasons I designed this audit process the way I did is I was trying to force an audit process that wasn't just in the hands of the kitchen. Because a lot of times the whole auditing process is culinary and stewarding. And it's like, you're missing out on two of the most important components: the services team who interacted with the client in the first place, and the banquets team, because there is a different view of waste when you see it all together out there, when you see what's happening in front of house versus it's all thrown, like you said, it's all mixed down with a compost bin, and you're like, oh, I wanted you to save those bowls of butter so I could. So I think that's and then that sort of drives a cross-functional conversation. And I just want to tell this one quick story. I love this.
Yes.
You talk about like banquet captains, especially banquet captains, have generally been at their property in their job for decades, right? Like, I can't tell you like how often you see this too, right? You encounter them. They've been, I've been at this property 18 years, 28 years, whatever, right? So I was doing a presentation at one of the hotels last year, and I was talking about the problem with fruit and putting up the slides of like the prolifically problematic items. And this banquet captain said, well, I was talking about like, there's all melon, honeydew, and cantaloupe, always. That was what I was explaining, that always, that it's not just all fruit, but it's especially honeydew and cantaloupe. And this guy says, yeah, but melon is cheap. And I said, well, congratulations, you didn't pay much for that trash. And that was a total, like, his eyes in that moment, I wish I had been videoing it, right? Because think about the mentality of that. I'm showing plates of cantaloupe and honeydew that are wasted. And his answer is, but melon is cheap. Just think about what all is packed into that response, right? That is the history and the culture that we have to undo. And that's not going to happen overnight. We have to really start to have a new norm and a new way of doing things.
So, which reminds me of my interview, not this March, but 2 Marches ago, 2022. I interviewed Jamie Gonzalez-Stevens out of San Antonio, and she works for a fruit distributor, fruit and vegetables distributor. But her handle is Puta de la Fruta, which means fruit bitch, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, when she was 14, she started working for her friend's thing, and she found out that it is the money melon. Melons make money, but nobody wastes them. And so she and I talked about that. I will actually put the link up to our podcast episode. Yeah, because she talked about it. I mean, because it is a money maker, and it's the thing that gets thrown away the most.
Yeah.
I mean, it is crazy.
And it's super heavy. All the rind, everything usually goes to waste. I mean, there are things that can be done with that. Most kitchens are not going to take the time. It's just going to all go straight to compost, or hopefully at least to compost.
Right. Yeah. It's mind-boggling. So, I mean, the work that you and I have done together, or since we've met, and what I've learned from you is
likewise.
Yes. It's just, remember when we did the first one at IMAX?
We did that, right?
Yeah.
It's a long way, baby.
Yeah. So here Aurora and I need to come back and do that again for you, and Dale. So, all right, ma'am, I love you. And thank you. Okay.
I was open at the spot. Like, what
I do. I'm so excited. All right. So my last question that I always ask, and I know I've asked you this before, but I want to see what your answer is. But what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience look like to you?
I guess just to kind of play up on the theme of what we've been talking about today, I would say for all who are part of the event ecosystem to truly see the food, to really see, because if you really see the food and you think about what it's made of, where it came from, who made it, what nutrients are in it, where it's going later, if you really see all of that and think about all that, you can't help but act in some way. And different people are going to respond to that. Some people are going to care more about like the end of life part of it. But if you really if we were all to really look at it and see it, we would treat it differently. And most people who are in sustainability or who get introduced, you hear this all the time, I'm sure, that once you kind of enlighten someone, they're like, oh my gosh, everywhere I go now, I see this. Like you probably hear that kind of thing a lot, right? You turn people on to this whole world of like ingredients and inclusion, and all of a sudden I can't not see it. And I think that would be, I'd love for people to see food holistically in that way.
And it's funny because people say, oh my God, Tracy's here. We can't tell her what we're eating. I'm like, I don't care what you eat, right? I'm not here to do that. I'm here to educate you on how to look at, like you just said, look at food and beverage differently and make it more of a strategic, as you said earlier, a more thoughtful and strategic thing, because it is your number one expenditure and you're not going to get away from that. And unless you stop surveying.
I mean, like you were talking about the keynote speaker earlier, right? That's integral to like the heart and brain experience. Food can augment, amplify, improve the entire experience someone has at the event, right? Through the nutrients, through the amount of waste, like all of that. So I think food, you're right. We need to pay more attention to the food.
Awesome. Well, okay. I love you again. And you're welcome. Everybody check out, let's see, Aurora. You can find Aurora. I put it up here that you can find her on LinkedIn. There's her LinkedIn profile if you want to find her there. And I will actually put your website address into the chat as well. But if you want to tell them as well.
I can type it in if you want me to.
I just posted it. Yep, there we go.
There we go. Yeah. Dropco.com. Please connect with me, ask your questions.
Yep.
And if you're on the West Coast, where we're trying to recruit more participants for the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, sort of focus on events. So reach out. I can let you know what that looks like. There's a little bit of funding to support it, not a lot, but don't leave free money on the table if you're on the West Coast.
Yeah. Okay. Cool deal. All right, everybody. Next month is next week, which is independent. And I always celebrate independence and freedom and what that means around food and beverage. So that will be a lot of the themes for next month in July. But I will be here, same time, same channel, Eating at a Meeting. Check us out. And actually, a new episode dropped yesterday, every Tuesday on your audio podcast. So make sure that you check that out. You can get Eating at a Meeting on your favorite podcast platforms. And I want to thank StreamYard and mention that I use StreamYard to do all of these broadcasts. Makes it very easy for me to do these. So, and if you didn't notice, Aurora was actually broadcasting it to her own Facebook page. So check out her Stropdo Facebook page to see a recap of it too. So thanks, everybody. And until next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.